This war in heaven and this chaos of the different creatures and entities on earth lasted millions of years prior to Noah's flood. Yes, this is contrary to the Bible's notion of 1,656 years passing between creation and the Great Flood. The lifespan of mankind in reality also supersedes what we are taught in the Bible. In the Bible, Adam lives to be 930 years old, which is a very long time, no doubt, but still believed to be a huge inaccuracy and another scribal error. It doesn't line up with other ancient texts, documents, archaeological, and fossil findings. Let's refer to the Sumerian kings list. Here, the reign of men is measured in sars, ners, and sosas. One sar is equal to 3,600 years. One ner equals 600 years, and one sos equals 60 years. The kings that ruled pre-flood reigned from 5 to 12 sars each, meaning from 18,000 to 43,200 years each. According to the Sumerian kings list, Adam's real name is Eloliam, and he reigned for 8 sars, which is 28,800 years. Just be realistic. How realistic is it that in counting year 0 to right now, 2020, it has been only 6,000 years since the beginning of creation and only 4,359 years since the Great Flood? That's relatively short in comparison to the fact that the oldest human fossil found was a female in present-day Ethiopia, dating back to 3.2 million years ago. Then just in comparison to the fossils and archaeological artifacts and remnants of civilizations we found that date back hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years ago, or the different eras of Earth according to the geologic time scale, which goes back billions of years. So make it make sense. I want you to put a few things into perspective as well. Number one, consider that this era prior to Noah's flood included more continents on Earth, and they were all one because they hadn't separated or sunken into the bottoms of the oceans and beneath the surface yet. We have this image of Pangea, but that image does not include all the lost continents that were swallowed up by land and water during the flood. Now, you can picture that there was actually much more landmass than there is today, even with all of our continents combined. Much more. Everyone is so bent on Atlantis and thinking that every place of substantial phenomena or of new discovery in recent history is Atlantis, but they neglect the fact that there were several civilizations just like Atlantis that sunk below the surface or were wiped out entirely or in general or swallowed up by the earth like 2/3 of the Tower of Babel was. Number two, consider that with this being an era lasting millions of years, the earth undoubtedly was more populated than it ever has been in our recorded history to date. Number three, consider the fallen angels were the teachers of the knowledge of all fundamentals, the sciences, mathematics, engineering, architecture, medicine, semantics, alchemy, metallurgy, writing, literature, magic, astrology, astronomy, cosmetology, every type of gnosis. It was literally all taught to us by them, and combine that with millions of years. Now, to say they were beyond more technologically advanced than us is an understatement. From Noah's flood until now is only about 4,300 plus years. And look at where we are technology wise and without the physical and large presence of the fallen. That is debatable as to whether the elites are actually reptilians or puppeteered by them. But even then, it's nothing in comparison to what it was like back then when they were very present physically in the open here on Earth with mankind. Just imagine how advanced we will be in just 10,000 years from now without them. And this would give you a good glimpse at how far ahead this era was. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you thereof you shall surely die. As stated earlier, these angels shared knowledge with the human. This verse is where knowledge is shared with Eve through the one called the great serpent. To this day, serpents are a symbol of wisdom. This is when Eve either literally or symbolically ate from the tree of knowledge as she was coerced to do. Knowledge in itself is the most valuable asset one can possess, but it usually comes with a price. There is also the stance that the more you know, the more depressed you are, because the more aware you are of yourself and the world around you. And reality isn't bliss. Statistically, those with the highest IQs are also those with the most mental issues. In fact, the focal point of Luciferianism and Satanism is knowledge, specifically a forbidden knowledge that highlights the truth, life, free will, civilization, magic, and independence through the worship of one's inner self and the world surrounding him. It's not actually at all what most people imagine it to be or what a few fake followers of it portray it as. Whether literally or symbolically, Eve obtained knowledge after her encounter with the serpent at the tree of knowledge. Funny side note, did you know that after looking through descriptions, botanists decided that the tree of knowledge is the acacia tree whose bark does actually contain DMT. I bet her eyes really did open after a bite of that. However, in exchange for taking the bait and acquiring knowledge from the serpent, mankind's immortality, utopia, the lack of needing or wanting for anything and being supplemented for everything by God was lost. From being in dominion over all land and beasts to being slaves to the land and beasts through having to fend for themselves. Alongside that, Adam and Eve were casted out of the garden and left to make shelter for themselves, work for everything they needed to sustain their hunger, thirst, and life. It was no longer given to them by God, and today the pattern continues in us. The Cave of Treasures is a text that goes into the details of Adam and Eve's voyage from Eden to the world. Trust me, it does not happen overnight. Satan and his exchange with Eve marks his fall from glory, making him the first fallen angel. According to the Cave of Treasures and the life of Adam and Eve, after they leave the garden, a lot of time passes. They learn how to survive in the world. A lot of things happen. They even fall prey to the serpent's whim again. But after that, they actually have a lot more kids according to the works of Josephus and the Book of Jubilees, which says altogether Adam and Eve had 33 sons and 23 daughters. This is how humanity multiplies exponentially from the intermarriage of the descendants of Adam and Eve's children. Marriage within a family was common back then, as seen throughout the Old Testament. It's even common in royal families to this day, so it's not that far-fetched. I say this because a lot of people question how all humanity could have stemmed from Adam and Eve if there was only Adam, Eve, Cain, and his brother Seth. If you come from one of those families where your grandma had at least 9 children, and now you have a humongous extended family, then you can understand how 56 children could very well populate the planet, especially through a few million of years. The women of this family are the women the fallen angels interbred with and taught the secrets of heaven to. This is where the book of Enoch gets into other angels joining Satan in his fall. It did not happen all at one time. It is noted that it started occurring around the birth of Seth's son, Enos. If you read the Talmud, the Apocrypha, and other extra-canonical books in relation to Genesis, it's tens of pages for what is basically only quarters of a page in the Bible. So if you're into details, I recommend checking those out. The Bible itself is basically based on first Seth's lineage in relation to Noah, and then Shem's lineage in relation to Jesus and their perspectives and writings, because from Shem's line, patriarchally, comes Jesus. All authors of the Old Testament of the Bible are direct ancestors of Jesus, while the New Testament is authored by his disciples.
In other words, the Bible is not told from the viewpoint of Ham or Japheth's direct lineage. Because of this, Ham and Japheth's lineages are mostly only mentioned in reference to being adversaries and pagans. Because the Bible is told and authored from and by Yeshua's disciples and Shem's direct line to Yeshua himself. This lineage and storyline is that of the Shemites, also known as the Semitic peoples. It is not told from those of Kemetic and Japhetic origin. If it were, it would most likely be written glorifying them and vilifying their brothers' lineages in the same way that the Bible does from the Semitic perspective. History, however, is after all told by the victors.
Side note, Yeshua's patrilineal ancestors also had a lot of Kemetic roots too, due to, number 1. Living in close proximities. Number 2. Wars and the changing of powers between lineages. Number 3. Being enslaved together. Number 4. Intermarriage. These ancestors just identified as Semitic, the same way interracial children today still often tend to choose one ethnicity, race, or culture to identify with based on differing factors of their environments. This is the history less told, however. The specifics of this will be given later in this series.
So, you do know that the Bible has a specific point of view it follows, and it sticks to the gut of the story, not screen. So the details are lost in the sauce, basically. You have to go elsewhere to get the details in the Bible, and these details are very important. The people who put the Bible together felt some type of way about them. So, in Enoch, we are told of a decree that was made as the Anunnaki pleaded with God for forgiveness, asking Enoch to relay their pleas to God, as God had turned his back on them and they no longer had access to direct communication with him and was denied the chance to re-enter heaven. When denied, They pled for their children to be spared punishment, but the verdict was set. God rejected every plea and saw how his beloved fallen angels, the Anunnaki, loved their children more than anything. And since their greatest petitions were for them and their children to be granted forgiveness and the chance to enter heaven, God saw it fit to make sure the fallen would watch their children kill one another. He then cursed the children so that when they died, they would be denied admission to heaven and their souls would instead immediately rise from their bodies and be damned to earth for eternity and made evil forever to torture mankind. This is where demons come from. The fallen themselves were not 100% evil as we are told. They actually pled for a chance to repent but were denied and then cursed. After this, the fallen were imprisoned. And the Lord said to Michael, "Go bind Shemjaza and his team who have associated with women and have defiled themselves in all uncleanness. When their sons have slain one another and they have seen the destruction of the beloved one, bind them fast for 70 generations under the hills of the earth, until the day of the consummation of their judgment, and until the eternal judgment is accomplished." I do assume, as with all things, all the children of the Anunnaki were not completely evil against mankind, but in general and on average they were. Nothing's new under the sun. So just like there are castes in society today that interact and even befriend or fall in love and reproduce together despite law or societal schisms, the same most likely applied here. Carrying on, the flood marked the end of the Anunnaki's reign. I do want to note that Genesis chapter 6 does lead us to believe that the flood marked the complete annihilation of the offspring of the Anunnaki, but this is not true.
Just like
Mankind's lifespan did not drastically decrease to 120 years old. It decreased over several generations. Shem, who lived before, during, and after the flood, lived to be 912 years old. Nimrod, son of Ham, lived to be over 900 years old. And Abraham was born during his reign in his domain. You get my point. As far as the average man being 90 feet tall, this height decreased over time. So there were exceedingly tall people still after the flood who were not the children of the Anunnaki. There are several groups described as giants, or amongst whom giants lived in the Old Testament, such as number 1. There are the Anakim, mentioned in Numbers chapter 13, and again in Joshua chapter 15 verses 13 to 14. These are the giant who the people of Israel encountered under Moses and later under Joshua, who were noted to be descendants of the Nephilim. David is notorious for slaying the giant Goliath, but his wife Maacah was actually the daughter of the king of giants named Talmai, who was noted as being a Nephilim offspring, him and his brothers. Number 2. At one time before the children of Israel traveled through the Transjordan, the land to the east of the Jordan River was heavily populated with tall people known as Emim, as stated in Deuteronomy chapter 2 verses 10 to 11, and the Zamzumim, also called the Zazum, who were also noted as being giants. Number 3. The Amorites, another group that stood in the way of Israel claiming the promised land, are described as being exceptionally tall. Number 4. There were the Raphaim, who are mentioned nearly 20 times in the Bible, most often in association with the conquest of the promised land. The Raphaite or Raphaim descend from the Raphaean mountains, whose exact location today is unknown. There have been various educated guesses such as the Arctic Circle, the Ural Mountains of Russia, and the Swiss Alps. The Raphaians, however, are mentioned as being located in Shem's allotment in Gath after the flood and serving as an obstacle for Shem's line, meaning these giants had survived the flood. They are believed to actually be from the mythological Raphaean mountains and also believed to be the Tuatha De Danann of Gaelic Irish folklore, who came, served their purpose, then went back inside to the middle of the earth where they originally had came out from.
Ham's mother is speculated to be of fallen angelic descent. This will be discussed more in depth later in this series, but as you can see, many from his lineage are listed as giants. Even to this day, people of deeper melanin and of purer African lineages are on average noticeably more muscular, physically stronger, more enduring, and with more height than the average person.
All the cave systems in the world and how elaborately carved out a lot of them seem to be. I mean, we are literally always walking on top of caves. Just look up how many cave systems are in the country you are located in right now. It's mind-blowing. I'm starting to think that originally mankind lived underneath the surface to escape the giants and the other creatures from torturing them. But at some point, these giants and other offsprings made their way into living beneath the surface as well, possibly to escape the Great Flood. Then outside of that, we have an account of the half-human, half-animal hybrid surviving, according to the documented run-in that Anah had. Anah is the grandson of Canaan, who was the son of Ham. Anah ran into these creatures while feeding his father's flock, as it says in Jasher chapter 36 verses 30 through 34. And there was a day that he brought them to one of the deserts on the seashore opposite the wilderness of the people. And while he was feeding them, behold, a very heavy storm came from the other side of the sea and rested upon the asses that were feeding there. And they all stood still. And afterward, about 120 great and terrible animals came out from the wilderness at the other side of the sea, and they all came to the place where the asses were, and they placed themselves there. And those animals from their middle downward were in the shape of the children of men, and from their middle upward some had the likeness of bears, and some the likeness of the keepcus, with tails behind them from between their shoulders, reaching down to the earth, like the tails of the duchipas. And these animals came and mounted and rode upon these asses, and led them away, they away unto this day. And one of these animals approached Anah, and smote him with his tail, and then fled from that place. And when he saw this work, he was exceedingly afraid for his life. He fled and escaped to the city. So one can only imply that God's intent was to wipe out most of these beings, enough to cause them to decline steadily into extinction, and by imprisoning their fathers, the Anunnaki, it was enough to cut off their supply to ensure extinction. This is probably why people have these tales of seeing these mythological creatures out and about in the wilderness and in the waters to this very day. Legends like vampires coming from Romania, mermaids being seen in Haiti, Bigfoot being seen in the southwest USA, tales of seeing water monsters all around the world. If these people are not just seeking attention, then these creatures they've seen are the last of their kind, just staking it out. All in all, Noah's flood was a fresh start for our kind, mankind. Noah himself was pure, not intermixed with any of the lineage of the fallen, and because of this, in God's eye, his line was the perfect blueprint of his original perfected creation, mankind. His 3 sons would repopulate the earth according to their given allotments and become the forefathers of all existing nations, peoples, and cultures. Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat, which is located present day within the borders of Turkey, Armenia, Iran, and the Republic of Azerbaijan, just south of the Caucasus Mountains. This became the new cradle of civilization. For more discussions of conspiracy theories or odd and unusual things that happen on this planet or in outer space or anywhere, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will not let you down. Also, what are some conspiracy theories you would like for me to talk about? Because I've heard a lot, but obviously I haven't heard them all. Please comment down below and let me know.